Good morning. An incredible schos to be here with you this morning and to continue Emeretz Hashem in our journey through Sefer Tehillim. So what I would like to do, Emeretz Hashem, for our last two classes before the summer break, is to focus on Tehillim Perek Dalet, chapter 4. And we're going to see that contained in this capital are a number of incredibly profound and meaningful lessons, like all of Sefer Tehillim. But let's begin with number one by taking a quick look at the capital itself. L'Natziach b'negidos mizmor leDavid. So literally again to the conductor with melodies, a song of David. B'kari anini Elokei tzidki, batzar hirchavta li chanini u'shemat tfilasi. When I call, answer me, O God of my righteousness. In my distress you have relieved me. Be gracious to me and hearken to my prayer. B'nei ish admek kavodi. Sons of man, how long will my honor be disgraced? David HaMelech says, how long will you love futility? How long will you constantly seek lies? Pasuk Dalid, Udu'u, ki hifla Hashem, chosid lo, Hashem yishma b'kar'i elov. You shall know, the Lord has set apart the pious man for himself. The Lord shall hear when I call out him. Rigzu, va'al techeto, Imru bilavavchem am mishkavchem v'domusel. We'll actually stop over here because we're going to focus really on the first part of this capital this morning. So, interestingly enough, whenever we learn, so again, the theme of the capital is one that we are quite familiar with. Again, what's interesting to note about this capital is as follows: Lamnatziach b'neginos. In the past, when we've seen this type of opening phrase, usually the theme of the capital is one of joy and jubilation. To the conductor, we know David HaMelech wrote the music for the Levitic choir. B'neginos, with a melody, usually has a connotation of simcha. Yet again, when we look at the subject of this capital, right, when we go ahead and we kind of go through the words, so we begin to see David HaMelech's pain in an incredible fashion. On one hand, he points out to me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I cry out to you in pain and distress, and you listen to me. But already again in Pasuk Gimel, B'nei ish adma kvod yilich lima. Already again, David HaMelech highlights, Son of man, how long will my honor be disgraced? So once again, you begin to see that the theme of the capital is conflict. Conflict. Now granted, again, it's conflict, but in the middle of this conflict, David HaMelech says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're always here for me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you always take care of me. But conflict nevertheless. Now, of course, like many kapitlach, David HaMelech goes ahead and kind of begins them singing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ribono Shalom, you hear me whenever I call out, whenever I am in distress. People afflict me. People visit so much pain and hurt upon me. But remember, we didn't do it inside, but I'll tell you outside, the capital ends, B'shalom yachtav eshkava v'ishan, ki ata Hashem levadad levetach toshiveni. In peace together, I would lie down and sleep. We're going to see another sleep motif in Emeretz Hashem in next week's shir. For you, O Lord, make me dwell alone in safety. So the end of the capital is one, once again, of emunah, of reliance, of faith in the Ribono Shel Olam. And if you look at so much of Sefer Tehillim, the capital follow this same type of theme. An expression of joy, an expression of what's the right word? I'll call it a sense of security in the Ribono Shel Olam. Baruch Hu will hear me. And then a discussion about all the turmoil, all the difficulty, whether it's spiritual turmoil, theological turmoil, interpersonal turmoil. And then the capital ends again with another statement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I know you have my back. I know somehow, some way, everything is going to be okay. That at the end of the day is the theme of this capital, and theme of many capitals. So whenever we look at Sefer Tehillim, the first thing we try to understand is when was this written? Because remember, if we get a little bit of historical context, we could appreciate a bit more what David HaMelech is trying to convey. So the Radak in number 2 says, Hanochon shene'emar hamizmar hazeh gamkin bevarchom mipnei avshalom. So this is incredible. According to the Radak, Capital Dalet is really an extension of Capital Gimel. Remember again, what was Capital Gimel? Mizmor leDavid bevarcho mipnei Avshalom beno. Right? Capital Gimel was a mizmor, a song that David HaMelech sang when he was running away from Avshalom. The Radak understands that this capital is an extension of that one. Lamnatzeach meneginos mizmor leDavid bekari aneni. David HaMelech calls out, people are afflicting me. The Radak says this was also said during his flight from Avshalom, which, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but it's really quite a dramatic thing that David HaMelech kind of puts out these kapitloch, puts out these magnificent, melodic, poetic pieces in the midst of such dramatic turmoil. Generally, when people are in turmoil, it takes all of their inner strength to just keep afloat, to just keep my head above water. People generally, we think that sometimes people find God in moments of crisis or in moments of trial or tribulation. I don't think it usually works that way. I think, in fact, when people are in the midst of crisis, they often have to use all of their koach just to simply stay afloat. That becomes the pinnacle of accomplishment. I'm not going to drown in the crisis. People, the time to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu is when life is tranquil, if that happens, right? When life is, when there aren't so many waves, when it's not so chaotic, that's the time when there's tranquility and peace to work on my relationship with the Ribbon Shalom. And if I work on it then in times of tranquility, when crisis comes about, which inevitably it does, I am ready to deal with the crisis because I am bolstered by that relationship with Hashem. And this, by the way, I think is the hallmark of David HaMelech. David HaMelech doesn't find God in crisis. Remember, again, David HaMelech found God during years of tranquility. You'll say, when did King David ever have years of tranquility? You're right. King David never had tranquility. David had tranquility before I became king. Right? Before I became David Malka Mashiach, before I became David Melech Yisrael, when he was just a regular private citizen, he was a shepherd, he did have years of tranquility, and it was during those years that he built a magnificent relationship with Hashem. And because he built that relationship, it was able to sustain him even in the midst of some pretty chaotic lifetimes. So it's incredible to see that Radak says another kapitel that David HaMelech created in the midst of his flight from Avshalom. Now, interestingly enough, the Malbim has a different approach. Machlokes, a little bit of machlokes on Mefarshim about the context of the kapitel. So the Malbim writes in number 3, Lamnatziach mizmor zeh tikein beis shahaya ra'av bimei David shalosh shanim. So the Malbim says, in fact, this kapitel was written in the aftermath, or during, actually, I should say, an incredibly tumultuous event. There was a famine. A regional famine that had taken hold of Eretz Yisrael for a period of 3 years. Now, what was the cause of the famine? V'leitzani hadar amru shu ba'avor chet David. This is incredible. The Leitzanim, right? So the scoffers or the mockers, they said, you want to know why there's a famine? Because of the chet of David HaMelech. Because of the chet of David HaMelech. The chet, of course, that they're referring to is the episode with Bathsheba. Remember, again, so much of David HaMelech's life is wrapped up in this event with Bathsheba. So much of it. And remember, at the end of the day, the Rebbe Shalom forgave David for that event. He forgave David for that trespass. But David HaMelech finds no rest. Everything that happens, everything that goes wrong in Klal Yisrael, everything that goes wrong in Eretz Yisrael, and everything that went wrong in the world, people always attributed it to the chet of David HaMelech. David HaMelech was unable to extricate himself from the clutches of that sin. I want to be clear. David HaMelech was the paradigmatic Baal Tshuva. David HaMelech did tshuva, he owned the chet, he owned the mistake, the Rebbe Shalom forgave him, Rebbe Shalom blessed the union of David and Bathsheba, but yet people would not let David move forward. They would not let him move on. So the Malbim says there was this 3-year famine. People claimed, the Leitzani Hadar, the scoffers claimed that the famine was a result of the sin of David. The David Shal Az Bathsheba, number 3, second line. David asked, Ribbon Shalom, why is there a famine? You see, we have to appreciate this. We live in a time when we've been living for the last 2,000 years without nevuah, without prophecy. But you know what it means to live in an era of nevuah, an era of prophecy, that when there's a problem, you could ask. Can you imagine that? Things happen in the world all of the time. And we always find ourselves asking the question, why did this happen? Why did that happen? And we have to kind of be content with the knowledge that although there's a reason for everything and there's an answer for everything, often we don't know it. So David HaMelech, there's a famine, a 3-year famine. They want to know why it is. David HaMelech asks the Ribono Shalom. And what happens? V'David sha'az b'Hashem, v'yomar Hashem el Shaul ve'el beis hadomim al asher harag es hagivonim upaisu es hagivonim v'yardu ageshem v'yas hikriv zivchei tzedek. So listen to this. So the Malbim says that in fact the famine came about for something dramatically different. The famine came about because of Shaul. It was actually a punishment to Shaul. Now Shaul was dead already, but it was a punishment to Shaul, ultimately again because Shaul had killed out the Givonim. Okay, what's this story? So take a look at number 4. So number 4 is the actual quotation from Shmuel Beis, which contains the story of this famine. So the Navi writes, Vahirav bimei David shalosh shanim. There was a famine during the days of David, which extended for 3 years. Shana acharei shana, vayibakish David es penei Hashem. David sought out, Ribono Shalom, why is this happening? Vayomer Hashem el Shaul ve'el beis hadomim al asher hemis es hagivonim. So literally translated, it is for Shaul and his bloody house because he put to death the Givonim. Now, this is interesting because the truth is we don't really find an episode in Navi of Shaul going ahead and killing out the Givonim. Now, before we get into this, who were the Givonim? Who were they? So remember again, in order to appreciate the Givonim, we have to go back a little bit earlier in Jewish history. Yoshua enters the land, right? Enters into Canaan. And the halacha was, Kadosh Baruch Hu told him that there's a choice. Either the 7 nations who inhabit Canaan could leave, or you kill them out. The idea being that the Ribono Shalom said that in order for Am Yisrael to have a sustained presence and build a spiritual home in Eretz Yisrael, you have to eradicate the negative forces. You don't have to kill anybody out. They're welcome to leave. And if they leave, we'll help them back. But at the end of the day, you cannot sustain these indigenous nations in your land. So therefore, again, what happened? So there are many battles that were fought. The Givonim were a nation who inhabited Canaan, and they realized that they would be unable to fight the Jewish people. So they did something very interesting, which is they dressed up. And they pretended that they were a foreign nation from a foreign land, not from Canaan. And they introduced themselves to Yoshua, and Yoshua makes a treaty with them. Then their lie is discovered, and it turns out that in fact they were one of the nations, indigenous nations. The problem was that Yoshua had already made a covenant with them. So to kill them out now or to expel them would be Yoshua going back on his word, and he couldn't do that. So instead, what does he do? He relegates them to the status of water carriers. So they were servants. They became the servants of the Jewish people. The Givonim became the servants. Okay, that's the story of the Givonim. Where does this episode happen where Shaul kills out the Givonim? So this is very interesting. So Rashi in number 5 explains over here. If you take a look at Rashi, it's Rashi paragraph Gimel. It's the last paragraph on the first page. Ala sherhimis es hagivonim, Rashi says, Kishaharag nov ira kohanim, hemis mehem zayin, shnei chot ve'itzim, u'shnei shah ve'mayim, b'shamish v'chazin v'sofer kam v'shugura. So remember, so the Rashi points out like this. You're familiar with the story. David HaMelech, right before David HaMelech, before he's king, David is the son-in-law of the king. He marries Michal, the daughter of the king, the daughter of Shaul. He's married to Michal. Shaul then has it out for his son-in-law. And Shaul is ready to kill David because he's convinced himself that David is trying to rebel. Now, to be clear, David is not trying to rebel. David has no interest in the crown. David has no interest in the monarchy. David is happy just to mind his own business. But Shaul is convinced that his son-in-law is trying to go ahead and kill him. So you know the story that Michal lowers David out of the window in order to escape her father-in-law, right? He puts some pillows onto the cover to pretend like David HaMelech is sleeping in bed, and David HaMelech escapes. Where does David HaMelech escape to? He escapes to a city called Nov. Now Nov, interestingly enough, was a city of Kohanim. Nov, Ir Kohanim. A city of all Kohanim. So he comes to Nov, and he tells the Kohanim of Nov, listen, I'm on a secret mission from the king. See, David did not want to air the family dirty laundry. Right? David HaMelech did not want to tell anybody what was happening. So instead he just says, I'm on a secret mission from the king. And he says, I left very quickly so no one should know I'm on the mission. I need food and I need weapons. So in Nov, they gave him food. They said, well, this is Nov Irakon and we don't have any weapons. Amazingly enough, the only weapon they had was the shield and the sword of Goliath, of Goliath, who David HaMelech had killed a little while earlier. Okay, so they go on. What happens? One of Shaul's spies, a guy by the name of Doeg HaEdomi, sees that Nov gave food and weapons to David. He comes back and he tells Shaul, the Kohanim of Nov are conspiring against you, to rebel against you, and they're working together with your son-in-law David. Shaul confronts the people of Nov, and the people of Nov say, Shaul, we don't know what you're talking about. Rebellion, what are you talking about? Your son-in-law came. He said he was on a mission from you. Because he was on a mission, we gave him food, we gave him weapons. What's the problem? Shaul orders Doeg to slaughter the entire city of Nov. The entire city of Nov. And together with the city of Nov, they also slaughtered a number of the Givonim who were working as water carriers and wood choppers and other tasks within the city of Nov. So therefore, again, to kind of loop this back, so what comes out over here is there's a 3-year famine during the reign of David HaMelech. So the late Sani Hadar, the scoffers, are blaming it on David and Bathsheba. David says, that's not me, Akash Baruch Hu forgave me for the sin. So he consults Yibam Shalom Akash Baruch Hu, who says, this famine is payback. It's retribution, ultimately, again, for what Shaul did to Nov, and more specifically, for what Shaul did to the Givonim. There was a treaty with the Givonim. Shaul violated the treaty with the Givonim, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu is exacting punishment on Klal Yisrael for the behavior of Shaul HaMelech. That was the 3-year famine. So again, so amazing enough, so the Malbim explained, that was this Malbim number 3, that this particular kapitel, Parak Dalet, chapter 4 in Tehillim, was written by David HaMelech during this time of famine. So now the kapitel begins to make sense, because when David HaMelech says as follows, B'nei ish amek kvodi lichlima, when David HaMelech says, when the sons of man, how long will my honor be disgraced? What honor is being disgraced? Because here there's a regional famine, and yet the mockers and the scoffers are blaming it on David HaMelech. David HaMelech says, why does everything come back to me? Why does, David HaMelech committed one indiscretion. So why does everything come back to the one indiscretion? Especially given the fact that I did tshuva, especially given the fact that the Rebbe Shalom has already forgiven me. Why does everything always come back to this one thing over and over and over? But I'll show you something interesting. See, the Malbim goes on. The Malbim number 6 says something quite amazing. The Malbim writes, Vahi Ra'av. So listen to what the Malbim says. Haksuvim morim kefi mashakasar absadja. Va'acharav hersik asar ma'ari b'tosas dvarim. Ki eis harag Shaul es nov yar kahanim. Nimtzu gam shama gam min ha-givonim v'ner goyim. Remember again, we said this before, that when Shaul killed out the the city of Nov, not only does he go out and kill out the city of Nov, but he also killed out a number of the Givonim. V'yor mahari, ki Shaul ne'enash b'shlosho anashim. Right? That Shaul was ultimately, again, he was punished for 3 things. So again, the Malbim goes through the three mistakes of Shaul. Now, what's interesting is the first 2 mistakes that Shaul made, we don't have to go through it, but the first 2 mistakes that Shaul made, Shaul was punished for during his lifetime. The last one, which was the massacre of Nov and the slaughter of the Givonim, Shaul was punished after he passed away. Right? This punishment only came when he was dead. And already remember the 3-year famine, which was the punishment for Shaul's behavior, comes after Shaul's death. And there's an incredible lesson that comes out of this, right? An incredible Musar Haska if we think about this. Let's talk about this for a moment outside. That what David HaMelech, and we're going to see what this kapitel is really trying to highlight for us, is this idea that, as we go through life, we shoulder many things. And the truth is, everyone's got a peckle. They often say that if everybody would take their peckle and put it in the middle, right, and you would see everyone else's peckle, you would take, right, everybody else's arts, you would take your own back. I'm not so convinced of that. I happen to think that that not everybody has the same tsaros. There are objectively people who suffer more and suffer less. And when I use the word suffer, I mean there are people who deal with different levels of adversity. And I don't believe the fact that if you say, I know people, and I know some people very well. I get to see a window into a lot of people's lives. And I know people's tsaros. And yeah, there are tsaros. I can see, this one would definitely swap with this one, and this one would definitely swap with this one. Not all tsaros are the same. Some people have more, some people have less. But leaving that aside, the one great common denominator of the human condition is that everyone carries their burden. Everyone. For some people, their burden are their parents. For some people, I don't mean the burden of caring for parents. I mean the burden of sometimes parents don't do a good job. And sometimes parents do a really terrible job, and they saddle their children with an emotional burden. That happens. And there are many people who walk around with a burden from their parents, not of their own making. Some people have the burden of failed marriages, failed relationships, children who do all kinds of different things. We all have the luggage, right? The burden that we carry. And of course, the one thing I didn't mention is the personalistic burden of failure, right? There's not one person who hasn't failed in some way. And if you think you haven't failed, I have news for you. You're just deluding yourself. All of us have failed at some point in time, in some way, sometimes big, sometimes small, and we carry that. Even if you don't think about it, most of us carry around our life failures. What David HaMelech is introducing us here is to something dramatically amazing, which is not only do we shoulder our personal burden, but we also shoulder the burden of our collective past. And I know what you're thinking. Oh gosh, for this I signed on to this year, right? This is what I'm starting the day, right? I'm exhausted enough from schlepping around my own peckle. And now Silver just told me that I also have the burden and the peckle of the collective Klal Yisrael of the past. So sometimes, even if you hear things you don't want to hear, it's good to know the truth. So this is the MS. And the MS is that there are many incredible privileges with being part of Klal Yisrael, but there are also many responsibilities. And part of that responsibility is we all shoulder the collective responsibility for the Klal. And that's what David HaMelech is highlighting in this kapitel. Because think about this for just a moment, right? Remember how the kapitel begins. If you think about it to a certain degree, the beginning of the kapitel doesn't really match that they'll call it the body of the kapitel. Because the chapter begins, Lamnatzeach beneginos mizmor leDavid. And as I mentioned before, usually when you see that introduction, the topic and the theme of the kapitel is upbeat, is exciting, is incredible. But yet, as you go through this kapitel, David HaMelech is highlighting pain and difficulty and the feeling of betrayal. Why do people treat me this way? Why do people interact with me this way? Why do I have to suffer? Why do I undergo this? Why do all of these things happen? Of course, again, David HaMelech then comes back, I know you've got my back, you're going to take care of me. So what's amazing is, David HaMelech almost begins with a euphoric feeling of being part of a collective, right? In moments we have this, often it's in times of crisis when we feel like this, but sometimes you have these moments where you say, wow, it is so incredible to be part of Klal Yisrael. I feel so privileged to be part of this collective nation. Maybe it's when you hear something amazing. Maybe it's in times of crisis, when you see the achdos, and you see the chesed, you see the unity, you see the kindness. There are incredible moments when we feel privileged to be part of the Klal. But David HaMelech says, by the way, but with that privilege comes awesome responsibility. And what's the awesome responsibility? That I also bear the responsibility when things don't go well. Right? None of us lives in a bubble. And when things happen within Klal Yisrael that are not good, when things happen that should not be happening, there is a sense of collective responsibility for those misdeeds and those mistakes as well. That's what's happening in this kapitel. There's a 3-year famine. And why is there a 3-year famine? It has nothing to do with David HaMelech. Not a mistake of David, like the Leitzim said. And by the way, it has nothing to do with anyone who's in a leadership position at that time. Who does it have to do with? Why is there a 3-year famine? Ultimately, because Shaul made a terrible mistake. Because Shaul slaughtered an entire city of Jews, and alongside with those Jews, he also slaughtered a whole bunch of Givonim, with whom Yehoshua made a treaty. So Shaul violated the treaty, he engaged in terrible, horrific bloodshed, and ultimately, again, now Klal Yisrael, Shaul is gone, right? Shaul's in Olam Haba, right? And now again, Klal Yisrael is being punished. Why? Because at the end of the day, there is this sense of collective responsibility. Something wrong happened in Klal Yisrael. And at the end of the day, now the Klal is being held accountable. But you'll say to yourself, for 1 second, as they say, is it a little fair? Right? Is it a little fair? I don't understand. What do you mean? Why David HaMelech is doing everything right. He's doing everything he's supposed to be doing. So now I'm held responsible for what Shaul did? And Klal Yisrael is held responsible for what Shaul did? So I'll show you something amazing. See, what the Navi really is highlighting, is what David HaMelech, what Tehillim is really highlighting, is the crime of Shaul. See, there were two crimes that were committed. There was the crime of Shaul in the slaughter of the Givonim, of Nov and the Givonim, but there was also the crime of the Klal. And what was the crime of the Klal? That was the crime of passivity. You see, no one stood up. No one stood up. No one stood up and said, you can't do this. No one stood up and said, you're not allowed to act like this. Shaul, you may be the king, but being the king doesn't give you the license to go ahead and supersede the divine will. Being the king doesn't give you the license to engage in questionable, not even questionable, in wrong, moral and ethical behavior. No one stood up. No one said no. No one said wrong. And from a Judaic perspective, silence is complicity. If you don't stand up in the face of evil, then you are complicit in the commission of that evil. You'll say to yourself, how could it be that Klal Yisrael is held accountable after Shaul is dead? Shaul's been dead for a while. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're bringing a 3-year famine because of what Shaul did, but Shaul's gone. But the Klal is here. And the Klal, no one, including David HaMelech. The truth is, David HaMelech was in transit, right? He was fleeing. He was in flight. He didn't know what happened until after the fact. But again, no one in the nation stood up. And because no one in the nation stood up, then ultimately, again, the Klal, the Am, is held accountable as being complicit because of their silence. And this, I think, is an incredible and overwhelming yesod. Because a lot of times in life, we assume that, if I'm not actively perpetrating the wrong, as long as I'm not perpetrating it, then ultimately, again, I'm not really responsible for it. If I'm not the perpetrator, then there's no liability. And what David HaMelech is really teaching us is, that's incorrect. If I see something that is wrong, and I do nothing, by the way, when I say, and I do nothing, then I'm complicit. If I allow evil to occur, if I allow, and I'm using a big word like evil, but you understand, if I allow something wrong to occur, and I have the ability, you don't always have the ability to stop something, but you do have the ability to object. And you do have the ability to say, this is not what we do. This is not how we behave. This is not how we conduct ourselves. If I don't go ahead and make my voice heard, then I become complicit. And if I become complicit, there is liability in the complicity of silence. The Klal, no one ever said to Shaul, no. I got it. You're afraid. He's the king. And the truth is, he was a little bit off the rails with David HaMelech. With David, there's no question. But no one said no. How can you allow the slaughter of innocent people? And no one ever says no. No one ever says, excuse me, you're not allowed to do that. And the truth is, I think this opens up a much bigger discussion. A much bigger discussion. I mean, the truth is, I feel very drawn to this discussion because, we're living in such strange times. And it's important for us to recognize that the overwhelming wave of anti-Semitism, it's here. we live a little bit in a bubble, and we kind of read what's going on in the outside world, but to a certain, cognitive dissonance is a very strong thing. And, we see active anti-Semitism happening, and to a very large degree, we also hear a lot of silence. Right? When other groups are targeted or attacked, there's a tidal wave of support from every single corner. And yet somehow, when it's Jews, the support is not the same. I mean, it's a general something we have to think about our place in the diaspora, and wondering, about where our future is and what our future is. It's a very significant communal conversation. I don't just mean communal Baltimore. I mean like communal conversation, like a diaspora Jewry conversation about where is the future and what does this really say about how the nations view us and see us, because sometimes the silence is deafening. And remember, we lived through deafening silence less than a century ago. And where there is silence, the most barbaric forms of hatred are allowed to rear its ugly head. It's dramatic. But I mean, even let's consolidate a little bit, because that's a heavy conversation, overwhelming conversation. But this notion that silence is complicit, that one is complicit if there's silence in the face of evil, kind of opens up a different conversation. There's an incredible Mishnah. I'll just tell you this outside. Actually, I mean, you have it on your sheet, but I'll talk about it outside. It's number 8 on the sheet, but I'll kind of extrapolate or expound on it outside. The Mishnah says, "Histakel b'shlosha dvarim v'yata b'alei de'avera." Famous Mishnah. Look at 3 things, and you will not come to sin. What are they? Da malam mimcha. Know what is above you. Ayin roa va'ozen shama'as v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtaven. Know what is above you. A seeing eye, a listening ear, and all of your deeds are recorded. All right, all of your deeds are recorded in the divine book. So the most basic, we're familiar with this Mishnah, right? So what is the Mishnah coming to teach us? So the way we normally read the Mishnah is as follows, right? Look at 3 things and you won't come to sin. And what are the 3 things? So there's an introductory phrase. The first introductory phrase is Da ma'ala mincha. Know what is above you. That's the introductory phrase. And what are the 3 things? There is a watchful eye, ayin roa, ozen shoma'as, a listening ear, v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtaven, and everything is recorded in a book. In other words, that what the Mishnah is sensitizing me to is, a lot of times I do things, and what I'm most concerned about is, no one should see me. I'm concerned that I want people, okay, we all sin, we all make mistakes, I commit an aveira, I just don't want anyone to see me. What I'm most concerned about is other people, what other people are going to think. And the Mishnah says, oh, by the way, you can fool people all the time. They say, what is it? You can fool some of the people some of the time, or all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all the time. It's not true, by the way. You can fool all the people all the time. There are many, many people who do it masterfully all the time. You can't fool all of the people all the time. So the Mishnah says, that's fine. You can fool all the people all the time. You can't fool the Ribbon Shalom. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu sees everything, hears everything, and records everything. So after 120, when the This Is Your Life ledger is opened up in front of you, and the Ribbon Shalom has recorded every single thing. And by the way, I want to point out, Ribbon Shalom records everything, which means, you see, we often think about this, he records every Aveira. That's true. He also records every mitzvah. I want to remind everyone of that fact, right? The Ribbon Shalom is much more focused on the good that we do than the negative things that we do. But he records everything. V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtaven. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh reads this Mishnah a little bit differently, and he says as follows. He says, "Histakel b'shlosha dvarim v'yata b'alei de'aver." It's true. Look at 3 things, and you will not come to sin. Right? What are the 3 things that you should look at? He reads it differently. He says, number 1 is da ma lemala mimcha. He says, number 1 thing to remember is know that there is a Ribono Shel Olam who choreographs everything. There is nothing haphazard that happens to me in life. Everything that happens to me is choreographed from the Ribono Shel Olam. Not just the things that quote-unquote God causes, but every interaction is choreographed by the Ribono Shel Olam. You know, if you have a negative interaction with someone, Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted you to have that negative interaction. Now, it's true, that person had the bechira, that person had the free will to speak to me nastily or to hurt me, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to have this experience, right? We often think that, you know, what are the things that God visits upon me? My parnasa is from God, my health is from God, those are the things, my children are from God, but the other stuff, like if I have a negative interaction with someone, that's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's Ploni, that's the other individual. No, everything that happens to me in life is choreographed by the Ribono Shel Olam. Da mala mala mimcha. All know that everything that happens to you is all lamala, is all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything that happens is from the Ribono Shel Olam. That's number one. What's number two? Ayin roa, a seeing eye, and ozen shomas, a listening ear. The Baal Shem says, you have to read this Mishnah. Everything you see in this world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to see. And everything you hear in this world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to hear. Why? Because if you see something, says the Baal Shem Tov, that is broken, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to see it. Do you know why? Because He feels that you have the ability to fix it. And if you hear of something that is broken in this world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to hear about it. Why? So that you can fix it. Now, fixing broken things in this world takes on different forms. Sometimes when you see something that's broken, I actively have the ability to roll up my sleeves and go and fix it. Sometimes, quote unquote, when I see something or I hear something that's broken, all I have the ability to do is to daven. Not all, that's significant also. To daven, to think about, to empathize, to pick up the phone. There are different ways in which we fix the broken things in life. But the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh is saying, what the Mishnah is coming to teach is, know that everything that occurs to you in this world is from Hashem. And therefore, ayin roa, if your eye sees it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to see it. Ozen shomas, if you hear it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to hear it. Why? Because if you see something broken, do something about it. You hear something broken, do something about it. And says the Baal Shem Tov, how does the Mishnah end? V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavin. Do you know what the litmus test or the barometer of a successful life is? Did you fix the broken things you saw? Did you fix the broken things you heard about? Because you see, most people go through life, and when they see something broken or they hear something broken, they krechts. You know, krechts. Ay, Nebuch. So sad. So sad. They were good krechters. They krechts, right? Or they say, Nebuch. And then what happens? 30 seconds later, I'm back to business as usual. Right? 30 seconds later, I'm back to my life. And meanwhile, says the Mishnah, no. That's not how it works. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed you to see something broken, He wants you to do something. Heard something or something that's broken, He wants you to do something. V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtavin. And do you know what's recorded in the divine ledger? Did you act to try to fix that which was broken? That's what's recorded, not the averos and the mitzvahs. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm allowing you to hear that which is broken. I'm allowing you to see that which is broken. Are you doing something to try to fix it? Because if you just go through life krachtzing, or you go through life nebuching, or you go through life just, sighing about the terrible broken things that you see, that's a wasted life. But if you see something broken and you try to do something, and by the way, sometimes the something is, can I tell you something simple? You're walking down the street and you see that Tzala ambulance go by, right? So what's interesting is that sometimes it's interesting. What's often the reaction? So I think what often happens is the reaction is either nebuch, or that it gives a person like I'm so happy everything is okay with my mishpacha, which is a good thing. But that ambulance, you could have been on any street, and that ambulance could have been taken any route. But that ambulance is dafka passing by you at that moment. And maybe what you need to do in that moment is just stop and say a kapitel of Tehillim. Just stop, kapitel of Tehillim. Just stop. 7 seconds it takes to say a kapitel of Tehillim. And if you don't know a kapitel of Tehillim by heart, just utter to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't know who's in the back of that ambulance, but I truly hope they have a refuah shalema. I'm davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If that ambulance, and again, that's such a simple thing, and I think it happens to many of us like every single day, and we don't really even give thought to it. But if that ambulance is crossing, I'm sorry, this is Baltimore. What is it? It's not ambulance, it's ambulance. Ambulance, right? That's how the Baltimoreans say it, right? So I'm from New York originally, so okay, we say ambulance, right? So again, if it passes right by me, Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I put that in your way. Maybe, what that person needs is just one more kapitel of Tehillim. Maybe what they need is just one more tefillah to tilt the scales in their favor, just one little thing. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu put that situation right in front of me, not to krechts, not to say nebach, not to say, oh, so happy it's not my mishpacha, because it is your mishpacha, it's always our mishpacha, but to be able to deliver that one additional tefillah. If you're seeing it, if you're hearing it, do something about it. Because what you do in those moments, when you see the broken things in life, that's how you're judged after 120. What did you do when you saw the broken things in this world? Did you try to fix them in some way? Or did you just krechts? And there are people who become 120-year krechtzers. We're good at krechtzing, right? And krechtzing is not a bad thing either, right? It's a physical display of empathy. But do something more than sigh. Do something. Sometimes I could roll up my sleeves and actively help and actively fix. Sometimes all I could give you is my neshama, is my tefillah, but I'm going to give you that. But when you see something, when you hear something, you see, they like to say, hear something. If you see something, say something. If you hear something, if you see something that is broken, do something in this world. Kapitel Daled, chapter 4 in Sefer Tehillim, is a Tehillim that comes as a response because no one did anything. Right? Isn't it incredible? At the end of the day, there's a 3-year famine because there was a wrong which was perpetrated. There was a wrong which was perpetrated, and yet no one stepped up. No one stepped up. Instead, what did people do? This is incredible. And here's what's even more incredible. So no one stepped up in the times of Shaul. No one said, hey, king, you might be the king, but you can't do this. This is wrong. There was no macha'ah. There was no objection. There was no voice of moral clarity. There was no one who said, you cannot do this. This is wrong. And so when you see something broken and no one takes a stand, there is collective responsibility for that. Because the entire reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in this world, you see, if you think about this, with this I'll conclude, if you think about this for just a moment, right? We often, I've spoken about this many times in past shiurim. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create such a broken world? Because the world is really broken. It really is. We like to say, comes to the Tova, everything is for the good, and that's all true. But the world is a really broken place. It really is. And yet, the Ribono Shel Olam could do anything and everything. So why would the God who could do anything and everything create something which is so broken? And what's the answer? The Ramchal brings this down in Derech Hashem. He says, because the Ribono Shel Olam is giving us an opportunity to partner with Him in the creative process. You see, if everything was perfect, and everything was great, and everything was whole, and everything was fixed, then what do you do for 120? You sit back, relax, and enjoy the show, right? You vacation, you work on your tan. Like, what am I doing in the world for 120 if everything is perfect and as it should be? Elamai, what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? The Ribono Shel Olam said, I did my piece with creation, but I purposely left a number of imperfections. And what do I want you to do with those imperfections? Again, not krechts. What do I want you to do? I want you to see those imperfections. I want you to see those imperfections, and I want you to try to do something to address those imperfections. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the wrongs. That's why He creates the imperfections, to give us the opportunity to partner with Him in the creative process. But when I fail to do so, not only am I shirking my personal responsibility, I'm shirking my communal responsibility, and to a certain degree, I'm shirking the entire purpose why I am here. I am here to fix that which is broken. I am here to partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the creative process. I am here to be attentive to what I see, to be attentive to what I hear, and not to krecht, but to do. And when I see something broken or I hear something and I do nothing about it, it's a fundamental shirking of personal responsibility, communal responsibility, and collective responsibility. And that's what David HaMelech highlights in Kapitel Dalid. Kapitel Dalid written, no, not during the flight from Avshalom like the Radak says, but says during the 3-year famine, a 3-year famine that occurred. Why? Because the community did not rise up to fix something which was broken. Because the community was not the voice of moral clarity in the face of the commission of wrong. Because the community did not go ahead and try to address that which was broken. As a response to this, David HaMelech ultimately pens Kapitel Daled. And the lesson is so profound for us, because as I mentioned before, at the risk of being repetitive, we see things broken every single day. Every single day. And it's amazing how attuned people are to seeing that which is broken. But yet the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh tells us, David HaMelech tells us, that if you see that which is broken, that is an invitation. It's an invitation to fix it. It's an invitation to do something. It's an invitation to partner with the Ribono Shel Olam in somehow doing our small part to perfect a very broken world. We'll stop over here for today. But in Meretz Hashem, we will continue in Parak Dalid. The Rav Hirsch that I have over 9, actually we're going to save as our intro in Meretz Hashem for next week's shir, and we'll continue in Meretz Hashem with focusing on the pasuk of Rigzu Va'al Techato, trying to build, amplify this theme in Kapitel Dalid, as well as in Meretz Hashem branching into others. Yesher Koach, everyone, wishing everyone a wonderful day and a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure, everyone.
Thank you.